Russian soldiers have breached or had breached Ukraine's second largest city of Kharkiv on Sunday. However, the Ukrainian military successfully repelled them. Now they're expecting a second attack, which could be much more aggressive. However, today, the first round of potential peace talks took place between Ukraine and Russia in Belarus. Unfortunately, the first round of peace talks ended with no peace deal. However, there is some optimism that the talks will continue. Now, Russian and Ukrainian officials held their meeting on day 5 of the war under the shadow of Putin's nuclear threats, and we'll give you more details about those threats in just a moment, and with Moscow's invasion of Ukraine running into unexpectedly fierce resistance and Western sanctions beginning to wreak havoc on the economy at home. A top Zelensky advisor said the talks held near the Ukraine-Belarus border were focused on a possible ceasefire and that a second round could take place in the near future. So that was the statement coming from the Ukrainian side. Russians had a similar message, although there is a caveat. A top Putin aide, for instance, and head of the Russian delegation said that the discussions lasted nearly 5 hours and that the envoys found certain points on which common positions could be foreseen. He said they agreed to continue the talks in the coming days. But here's the big caveat that I was referring to. While Ukraine did in fact send its defense minister and top officials, the Russian delegation was led by Putin's advisor on culture, an unlikely envoy for ending the war and perhaps a sign of how seriously Moscow views the talks. But nonetheless, the small sliver of good news when it comes to this conflict is that they plan on continuing these talks. And it's a little surprising, Cenk, because initially, the thought was that Russia, which of course has much more military capability than Ukraine, would come in, do this invasion, and essentially get the job done immediately. But the resistance from the Ukrainian side has been so fierce, even considering how they're not as well resourced as the Russians are, that now all of a sudden you see them engaging in these peace talks, and that's good. That's what we want. We want a ceasefire. We want the peace talks to continue.
Yes, so we're now in the middle of something very interesting. We're gonna find out if in the modern world, a military physical conflict is more powerful or a financial conflict is more powerful. Because basically the world has waged financial war on Russia and they're already economically devastated. So one of the barometers will be if Russia all of a sudden instead of sending their culture and folklore minister, or a dancing troupe sends in a real delegation to these talks, because that'll mean, this is not going as we had planned. And they could not have planned this, because right now their economy is devastated, the Russian economy. And the Ukrainians have put up a tremendous fight, and every day there's more stories. Gold medalist boxer Alexander Usyk today came out and said that he is also joining the fight, and he's getting weapons and joining the army, etc. And they're going to be in the streets. And so, and already Klitschko, of course, the current mayor of Kiev, also a heavyweight boxing champion, and his brother, also a heavyweight boxing champion. And you're hearing all these stories, and the wonderful stories of the woman who had the sunflower seeds and gave it to a Russian soldier and said, "Please put it in your pocket, so the beautiful sunflower seeds will grow once you all die here." Okay, so I love those stories, and you shouldn't have any war at all. But I don't agree with the Trump people we're gonna show you later in the show who say the Ukrainians should surrender already. No, they're doing an amazing job, and they might yet win this.
Right, and just to buttress your point about the economic destruction of Russia, there really is this united front in implementing sanctions against Russia. Switzerland, which is of course notoriously neutral on any type of world conflict, has decided to freeze the assets of Russian oligarchs and Vladimir Putin. This is something that's actually pretty unprecedented for Switzerland. Usually money gets stored over in Switzerland to prevent any type of sanctions from actually hurting those in positions of power or those who have quite a bit of money. In this case, we're talking about the oligarchs and Putin. So you have that situation. Turkey has also come in. They've condemned the invasion. However, they're kind of trying to straddle this situation because of their economic interests with Russia. They have not implemented sanctions against Russia. However, they are restricting passage of Russian warships through their straits. So that's some bit of action, which is good news. You know, we want the war to end, and we want peace talks to continue. And to be sure, you're seeing more and more belligerent behavior and rhetoric from Vladimir Putin. In fact, let's get to the details about his nuclear threats here. Putin declared on Sunday, for instance, that he was putting his nuclear forces into special combat readiness, a heightened alert status reminiscent of some of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. Now, Biden was asked about this, what should be done, what is the US response? There are equally belligerent idiots on the US side who are calling for NATO to do military strikes against Russians in Ukraine. And I get the urge to want to do something like that, except that could spark a disastrous situation because we're talking about a nuclear power here. So I actually want to give Biden a lot of credit for having a measured response to this. He says that Americans should not be concerned about Putin launching some sort of nuclear attack. And the US, again, has responded in a measured way. Let's go to graphic 6 here. Biden chose to de-escalate, which is good. The American ambassador to the United Nations reminded the Security Council on Sunday afternoon that Russia was under no threat and chided Mr. Putin for another escalatory and unnecessary step that threatens us all. The White House made it clear that America's own alert status had not changed. So there was no tit for tat here. The United States didn't respond to Putin's threats with its own nuclear threats, and that's good news. And by the way, Russian state TV is also putting out some pretty terrifying content. Here's an example. This was tweeted by Max Seddon, who is a Financial Times reporter. Russian state TV says, our submarines alone can launch more than 500 nuclear warheads, which guarantees the destruction of the US and NATO for good measure. The principle is, why do we need the world if Russia won't be in it?
Yeah, obviously that's very scary talk. And in Russia, the media is largely propaganda for Putin, the larger outlets. And so there's, by the way, the world's bravest journalists are in Russia as well. And those are the ones that get amazing information about the wrongdoings of Putin's government and honest reporting overall. So, but when a propaganda outlet for the Russian government tells you that the nukes are ready and why do we need the world, they're obviously trying to send a message. And so they were gonna threaten the nukes at some point, presumably, and man, they got to it quick. So that's because the ruble's gone. It's down to a penny it's worth. And all the markets are closed down in Russia. They'll be closed down tomorrow. And by the way, it's not just Switzerland. Monaco also joined the sanctions. And that is where a lot of the Russian oligarchs apparently stashed their money. So I don't know what Putin's plan was and what his end game was. But again, I can't imagine that his plan was for the war to go like this. Because right now there's a run on the banks. There's the ATMs are out of money in Russia. And so when we talk about devastation, it is coming to Russia financially. They're cut off from the rest of the world. And look, there's a silver lining here. If the financial sanctions work, it could be a deterrent to not just Russia, but to all countries. You go to war or invade another sovereign country, and we will all do a financial blockade of you, and you'll suffer the fate that Russia did. Well, that's a very heavy deterrence, and probably why the Chinese are still on the fence. Because if they want to take Taiwan and they see how Russia's being devastated, that's got to scare them a little bit. Now back to Turkey. They have limited Russian warships from going through the Bosphorus. Other Russian ships, because of commerce clauses that they have, can still pass through. So is that real? It's hard to tell without great reporting on the ground. But if it is real, well, that's got a huge upside and a huge downside. Turkey definitely switched from calling it a conflict to a war, and that's what allowed them to block the Bosphorus for the warships. Well, that's a great news because Turkey was also wavering a little bit before hostilities began. They're no longer wavering. They're clearly coming out on the side against the Russians. And so that hurt. If the Russians cannot get out of the Black Sea, That hurts them a lot.
Yes.
But the downside to that is Turkey's a NATO country. If the Russians say, no, you will remove your ships and we will pass through the Bosphorus, and they fire on Turkish ships, that means they fired on America. Turkey's the second largest military in NATO, and that's what the whole point of the NATO alliance is. Well, then we're at a completely different level. So while things appear to be going very poorly for the Russians, remember, if Putin wins, that's bad news for the whole world, because then his aggressive military actions are rewarded and he might do more, and that destabilizes the whole world. But if he loses, or he's on the verge of losing, that's not great news either, because it puts a guy who is very aggressive in a corner, and he might want to fight his way out of that corner, and as he escalates that fight, things can get awful. So we don't know which way he's going to go yet.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's really hard to predict with Putin, as you guys can probably notice from the coverage that we've done on this war. But I want to go back to the impact of the sanctions for just one moment, because the pain that's being felt by innocent Russian citizens should be, we should definitely pay attention to that. Because the sanctions not only harm the oligarchs and Putin, which I have absolutely no problem with, when you have countries agreeing to ban Russia from SWIFT, which is the global financial system, that causes a lot of heartache, a lot of pain for ordinary Russian citizens, and we don't want that. In fact, I mean, the way that Putin and his government has responded to protesting Russians in the country has been pretty brutal. Literally thousands of Russians who have taken to the streets to protest Putin's actions have already been jailed, as many as 6,000 according to recent reports. And I did want to also share this quick image of Putin meeting with officials to discuss the economic turmoil. Cenk, you'll love this image. So there's Vladimir Putin meeting with officials in Russia to kind of figure out what to do about the economic turmoil as a result of these sanctions. Seems like a man of the people. Seems like someone who's really interested in feeling out how this is going.
No, how does he not realize how absurd that is? How does everyone in the room not realize how insane that looks? So, and it's so symbolic. So Putin's on one end and has all the power. Even within his own government, he has everyone on the other end of the room doesn't care, like symbolically doesn't care to hear from them. They're not relevant. They get together there for what? I don't know, right? I mean, if they want to pass a message to Putin, they're gonna have to walk down the table to tell him. I mean, or otherwise they're shouting like, "Hey, Vlad, we think you should send the knitting minister, okay?" Like. I mean, but that's the problem, guys. We can't project our rationality onto Putin. He doesn't think like us. He is obviously over the top aggressive, thinks he has something to prove. That's a really dangerous man in a dangerous situation. And so if he's out of options and the oligarchs then turn on Putin and say, hey, what are you doing here? How are you gonna get us out of this? I don't know how that ends. No one in the world knows how that ends. I'm not sure Putin knows how it ends. And remember, I'm gonna say a really weird analogy here, but I remember Mike Bloomberg going into the presidential debates in 2020 and getting humiliated. And everybody's like, wait, I don't get it. He's a multi-billionaire, one of the richest men in the world, was the mayor of New York. How could he have not been prepared for these debates? He's been thinking about running for president all this time. He had so much time. He had all the money in the world. How could he not be prepared? He got humiliated at the debates. He wasn't ready at all for any of the points, right? Because when you get that rich and powerful, you get surrounded by yes men. And they're all telling you how great you are, and you get incredibly arrogant, and you don't prepare. And so Putin might be in a situation where he didn't expect things to go wrong at all. And all of a sudden he's like, whoa, what just happened? All of Russia's money now is worthless. Think about that, guys. They cannot use the money outside. And he's blocked people from taking their money and sending it abroad, but that also means they can't pay interest on the debt that they owe, not just the Russian government, the Russian citizens, the Russian oligarchs, and then they're all gonna be in default. I mean, this thing could go very quickly. Like right now, they're completely cut off from the world and their money's worthless. I don't know what they're gonna do. So I can't believe 5 days into this, we're talking about how Russia is more devastated than Ukraine.
By the way,
and let me just be clear because I don't want anybody to misunderstand me. The lives lost in Ukraine are far worse, right? But I'm just shocked at the instant economic devastation of Russia.
Right, and I also want everyone to understand that this isn't the first country that the United States, for instance, has implemented crippling sanctions on. In this case, we're talking about war crimes, an invasion of a sovereign country. But when it comes to Iran, I mean, Iran was cut off from the global economy as a result of the United States, and that was after our own government decided to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, a deal that was agreed upon not just between the United States and Iran, but between several different countries. And then we decided to just implement these sanctions against Iran, even though they were following through with their side of the deal and we're the ones who pulled out. So I give you that because it's important to understand context and balance, right? Obviously the way the United States has handled foreign policy in various different examples has not been great. But in the case of Russia invading a sovereign country like Ukraine, we should not be calling for NATO to do military strikes against Russia and Ukraine. That military action could escalate the situation severely into something that could lead to a nuclear war. I think that economic sanctions make sense, but there is a price or a real cost to innocent human lives in Russia as well. So this is not an easy situation, and it's important to not treat it as a black and white issue.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.